Good morning, church. Good morning. Turn in your Bibles to the book of John, the 11th chapter. John, chapter 11. There's some very, very dangerous things that can happen in life, especially during worship service. One of the most dangerous things that can happen, or one dangerous thing that can happen, has actually happened to me and happened here. That I open my Bible and there's no notes. And nothing that I memorized. Probably even more dangerous than that is when I open my Bible and I have some handwritten notes for a sermon, and then I have a printed out set as well. I have two different sermon outlines here. I really don't know which one to use. We've been studying about the I Ams, and that's been our sermon series, the I Ams of Jesus. We've asked ourselves a question, really, who is the babe in the manger? He declares of himself that he is the great I Am, and we study those 7 different I Ams throughout the book of John. John chapter 11 is no exception. So we have studied about those throughout the last several weeks. We've seen that Jesus declares that he is the bread of life. He satisfies our longing and our hunger for him, for righteousness. And that we've also seen that he is the light. He is the moral and spiritual guide for our lives. He also is the door through whom we must enter the sheepfold. He's also the good shepherd that lays down his life for the sheep. This morning, we're going to learn the simple truth. I say that a little bit facetiously, that he is the resurrection and life. I can't go a step further without thanking Joe for choosing the passage he did this morning for our communion meditation that talks so much about what we're going to speak about this morning in this lesson. You see, when we stop and consider this time of year, we celebrate the birth of Jesus, and the whole world is focused on this time of year as celebrating the birth of Christ. It's not just the babe in the manger that we celebrate. We celebrate who Jesus came to this earth to be as well. And in so many different ways, Jesus revealed to us exactly who he is. This morning, we're going to talk about Jesus being the resurrection and life. Now, I know most of you are probably familiar with this account of John chapter 11. Very lengthy, 45, I believe, verses that explain or tell of this situation and where Jesus explains being the resurrection and the life. Now, I'm not going to read all those verses. You can say amen. This morning. But I do want to study several in particular. First of all, I'd like for you and I to look at these particular verses. Starting in verse 20. Jesus had been away, and we'll go back and pick up this narrative, but I want us to see the conversation between Martha and Jesus. Verse 20 says, Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him. They had sent word to Jesus to come because Lazarus was sick. Now, by the time Jesus gets there, Lazarus is dead, and he's coming down the road, and Martha goes to meet him, but Mary still sat in the house. Martha therefore said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother shall rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Which prompted the words that serve as our study today. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me shall live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. You bow me in prayer. Father, it's amazing, humbling, and exciting all at the same time when we try to comprehend you revealed through your Son. And Father, we sometimes, I'm guilty of just reading over and just grasping what the surface teachings, what's revealed in your word are, when there's so much depth that would encourage us and strengthen our faith, that would cast away all our traditional beliefs, if we would just take the time to really get to know you through your word. Father, I pray that for us this morning as we study for the next few moments. In Christ's name, amen. We'll pick up here in John. As I said, perhaps this is one of the most familiar stories of Jesus' whole entire ministry. Perhaps even the most notable miracle that Jesus ever worked. And I've always considered that in my own heart and mind. The raising of Lazarus from the dead was one of the most, is the greatest miracle that Jesus has ever worked, apart from resurrecting himself by his own power from the grave. But before the cross, the greatest of all miracles, raising Jesus from the dead. As I been studying about this particular passage, I had to ask myself, why? Why is it most notable? I mean, this certainly isn't the first time Jesus has worked a miracle. We've already considered that. We've considered Jesus being the bread of life, the miracle of feeding the 5,000 plus women and children there. What a great miracle. Definitely not the first miracle that Jesus worked. And certainly not the first time that he's raised somebody from the dead. You will probably remember Jairus' daughter. Jesus raised her from the dead. So Lazarus is not the first one Jesus calls back from the dead. Maybe you'll also remember the widow's son of Nain, whom Jesus stopped the funeral procession, touched the bier, the casket kind of thing, and raised him from the dead and gave him back to his mother. So why, if Jesus has already worked all these miracles and even raised other people from the dead, why is this considered most notable of all of his miracles? Well, some would say because of where it took place. I mean, here he is at the past the height and popularity of his ministry. I mean, matter of fact, if we would read the first few verses here, when word reaches Jesus and his disciples that Lazarus is sick, and that Mary and Martha has sent for him to come and heal their brother, Lazarus, whom Jesus loved. We'll see that whenever he does decide to go to Lazarus, that his disciples, they don't want him to go. Well, Lord, you know that, the Jews were just ready to stone you before we left. And now you're going to go back? Some would say it's because Jesus is taking this one miracle kind of right to their doorstep, if you will. I like that. I like that thought. I don't know that that's what makes it real popular, because the reason I say that is a lot of people, including myself, that sometimes just read casually and don't really read into the text, wouldn't catch that. But most all people really hold to the tradition, at least, that This is the most notable miracle that Jesus performs before his death on the cross. So why is that? That's amazing. That if we do slow down and read the text, not once but twice in these 45 or 46 verses that contain this account, Jesus says this, that Lazarus' death, or Lazarus' sickness is not unto death, but that the disciples may believe, and it is to the glory of the Father. And then even too, after Mary comes and joins in and says the exact same thing that Martha's already said to Jesus. Jesus, Lord, if he'd have been here, my brother wouldn't even have died. And Jesus says plainly, just before he prays to the Father and raises Lazarus from the dead, once again, that it's to the glory of God. I thought a lot about that, and I thought about our recent seminar with Jerry Paul and prayer, and how everything is for the glory of God. I mean, that's why we're born. We're born to serve Him, to bring Him glory and honor. And I thought about that. I'll be honest with you. You might not know this about your preacher, but I get pretty excited sometimes. I get kind of revved up about things. And sometimes I get so revved up about things, I just don't sleep. I mean, my wife has a cage for me when those kinds of things happen. Not quite a cage, but I just tell you this. I'm not allowed in the bedroom. You're not keeping me up all night, buddy. You can head to the couch or the basement, take a pick. And she's never said that, but she's often implied that. Last night and several nights in the past weeks have been that way. Now, I don't know why I forget to bring a hanky and put it in my pocket when I know I'm going to be a little emotional about things. I just happened to be awake last night, and I get a text. This is what this text says. Matter of fact, I get this text at 1:26 a.m. It says this. I was asked to read this to you this morning. What do you think? Those of you who never believed that God, those of you who never believed that getting Gary this far along in this journey is an answer, turn away. Those of you who have never seen the miracles, turn to God. Those of you having trouble believing God can do miracles in your life, just believe a little more. God loves us all. We're all His creation. He wants us in heaven with Him after this life and experiencing His love now here with Him. Please turn to Jesus while you still have time. People say everything happens for a reason. Yes, the Bible is clear. God's goal is for all of us to accept and follow Him. He tells us how in His Word. All we have to do is read the book of Acts right after John in our New Testament. This tells you how Jesus' apostles started His church here on earth and how we are to become His followers. Gary's illness that's got a little bit more to go. Is to bring some of you to Jesus. If that someone is you, please do give this some consideration. Please pray about it. God always answers the prayers of those who are wanting earnestly to know Him. God bless you. And at the end it says this, Jeff, would you please read this at church in the morning? And I answered I would. You know, I just want to say one thing about that. I love an unselfish heart. Maybe that's why I get so emotional about that. Someone in that situation for going on 5 weeks now, and think about somebody else. And what their situation, as bad as that might be for the benefit of someone else. I'd say that's pretty unselfish, wouldn't you? Let me ask you a question. Why do all you all, that's everybody, send that stuff to me, a big crybaby, and ask me to read that in front of all you all? Jesus said not once but twice in our text, Lazarus' death, sickness was not unto death, but to the glory of the Father. That's what our lives to be about. To bring glory and honor to God the Father, even in death. Even in our death. Wow. Well, there's another reason that this might be the most notable of all the miracles that Jesus performs before his very own death on the cross. And that is this. This text says something else twice in it. I'd ask if you would start following along from verse 1 with me. We're going to read that particular phrase. Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and his sister Martha. And it was the Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment, wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. The sisters therefore sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified by it. How would that be? Well, we'll see at the very end that many believed on him because of this very miracle. Now Jesus loved Martha and his sister and Lazarus. When therefore he heard that he was sick, he stayed then 2 days longer in that place where he was. Do you not care? Then after he said this to his disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you're going to go there again? You see, I want us to notice something. Even his disciples, those that were most intimate with Jesus, who really got to know him, who got to spend the quiet moments alone with him, didn't even have their focus in the right place. You ever been there? I find myself there all the time. Oh, I see what you're trying to do there now, Lord. That's exactly where the disciples are here. Jesus answered them, are there not 12 hours in a day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not from him. What Jesus is doing there is just saying, listen, we've all been allotted a time to work. And when it's time to work, we put our hand to the plow and we work. Verse 11. This he said, and after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go, that I may awaken him out of sleep. The disciples therefore said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought he was speaking of literal sleep. Then Jesus therefore said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. That they may believe, was they not part of the funeral procession whenever he raised, whenever his parade, the parade of life met the parade of death, there at Nain, just on the gate, outskirts of town, there at the gate, the city gate, where those two parades, the parade of life and the parade of death, clashed right there? Were the disciples not part of that? Why do they need to believe? They've already seen him resurrect the dead. What is he talking about? was called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. Still focused in the wrong place. So when Jesus came, listen to verse 17. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb. How long? You say that again. Okay. You know what that means? If he stayed where he was at 2 days, that Lazarus, most probably by the time the message reached Jesus and his disciples, Lazarus was already dead. He stayed 2 more days, and it's a day's journey back. 4 days. This text, these 46 verses, contain that fact twice. As a matter of fact, when Jesus says, roll the stone away, she objects. I like the King James Version. Lord, by this time, he stinketh. And he hadn't just got done playing a football game. You know what she's saying to Jesus? Lord, he's dead. Was he not dead the first day? Incredible difference between this account of someone dying, Jairus' daughter, and the widow's son at Nain. When we read those other 2 accounts of Jesus resurrecting people from the dead, we know where in those accounts, the sacred scriptures read that person had been dead for 4 days. But we read that about Lazarus. And we also have those beginning verses of this particular chapter that tell us that Jesus stayed exactly where he was at when he received the message that Lazarus was sick for an extra 2 days. Why? So that Lazarus would have been dead for 4 days. Well, whippity-lotty-dee, Jeff, we can do math too. You already know that there's something more significant to this. Alfred Edersheim, converted Christian from Judaism. And I would tell you what century, but I tell you the wrong one, so I'm just not going to say it. Quotes a theologian by the name of Goddard, who read of a Jewish philosopher. And I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to say his name. But what God has said is this, in his quote of this Jewish philosopher. I've done some reading on this guy. He died when he was 44. His dad died whenever he was very young. And his mother, she tried to teach him all the ways of the Jews and tried to raise him up to be a good Jew boy. Somewhere along the 15th century, maybe. And he's from I believe he was raised in the Netherlands. And he turned into a philosopher. And he was such a great philosopher, even by the time he died at the age of 44, that another philosopher of his day called him the Prince of Philosophers. This guy, he could really do some thinking. But he rejected Jesus as a Christ. He rejected the authority of the Scriptures. He rejected all that. But here's what he says about this one account that you and I are studying, where Jesus says, I am the resurrection and life. God quotes him and says this: if this miracle be true, if this be true, then we are forced to believe all others. Why? Why is this one so significant? Because that good Jew boy and Goddard and Alfred Edersheim all knew this fact. You see, they could all read the rabbinical writings of old and what they taught about death. And the Jews had so many traditions about death and when people died. And you'd be amazed if you read that list. There's so many of them that are similar to ours. I'll just give you one, for example. As a matter of fact, you can even go to the Middle East now, and archaeologists have done this, and probably even pictures of this on the internet. Whenever they go into these tombs, like where Lazarus was laid, there would be inscriptions on the walls that would say something about the deceased who was laid there. Do we not do something similar to that? We place a stone at the head of the grave. They don't have the birth date and the date of their death. Maybe they'll have an inscription on there, something about their life. That's just one of many, many similarities between their traditions and ours. But one tradition that the Jews had was this. When they placed a body in the tomb, the day expired, they believed that there was somewhat of a soul sleeping taking place. That the soul or the spirit of a person never actually left the body until guess what day? The fourth day. And the reason they believed that is this. Because on the fourth day, the body of a deceased, of a corpse or a deceased person, would start to sink. And that's when it really was noticeable the decay that would take place in the face. So they equated who the person was with their face. We do that as well. I mean, you say someone's name and an image of their face pops in their mind. And that's exactly where they got this from. See, Jesus had raised the dead. Jairus' daughter hadn't been dead 4 days. Jesus had raised the widow's son in Nain. I mean, they're having a funeral. They're going to the cemetery where Jesus raised him from the dead. He hadn't been dead 4 days. Lazarus, on purpose, was dead for 4 days. You see, if Jesus performs this miracle, not in the outlying areas, miles and miles and miles away from Jerusalem, but right there under the noses of those Jewish religious authorities of the day and all the Jews right there near at the gates of Jerusalem, here at Bethany. If he would raise somebody that was really dead, I'm talking about being dead in the mind of the Jews, we would agree with God. As he quotes that Jewish philosopher, if this miracle be true, then we must believe all others. Jesus stayed purposely 2 more days so that Lazarus would have laid in the tomb for 4 days. So why? That the disciples would believe, even though they were there when he raised the widow's son of Nain. They were a part of that procession of people that was walking alongside the Lord when he stopped that fire and raised him from the dead. But he wasn't dead 4 days, so in their mind, his soul had not left his body yet. But when they get here, and the sisters are objecting, Lord, don't open the tomb. Lord, don't. He's really dead, Lord. He's really dead. And Jesus says, roll the stone away. Whether they're going to believe, the Jews are going to believe in Jesus as the Christ or not, hangs in the balance of what happens next. And Jesus prays to God and thanks him for hearing him and knows that he always hears him. And then he shouts, Lazarus, come forth. And our text says that he came forth bound. And Jesus told them, standing there, to unbind him, to loose him, and let him go. Jesus, the Christ, is the resurrection and the life. No doubts from this point beyond. So what's that mean for you and I today? We already realized that. Well, I would say that we have some traditions, just as Martha had here in our text. You remember what she says. Jesus says, your brother will rise again. Martha said, I know that he'll rise on the last day of the resurrection. And that's what Jesus says, I am. What tense is that? I am the resurrection and the life. She understood that there was coming a day when those who believed in Jesus would be resurrected to an eternal life. She knew and understood. She stated that very plainly. But she objects when Jesus wants the stone rolled away. Why? Because he's dead. He is as dead as anybody can get, at least in the Jewish mind, because he's been dead for 4 days. The soul has departed from the body. I am the resurrection and the life. I would say that there was many, if not all of us here, that have at least some traditional thinking about what the last day is going to be like. A lot of excitement. You remember how I was saying I get excited sometimes? Not like every single one of all you all are going to be on that day. She had some traditional beliefs about what the resurrection was going to be like, which included this. Jesus not being able to raise Lazarus this very day from the dead because he's really dead now. She believed that. Why'd she object to him rolling the stone away or having the stone rolled away? Why would she have objected to that? I would say that as Christians today, we have some traditional beliefs traditional beliefs that really prevent us from seeing Jesus as the resurrection life. I am. What tense is that? I am the resurrection and the life. You see, the Bible teaches us and talks to us and explains to us that we can have a brand new life. When does the Bible say that can take place for you and I? Baptism. Romans 6, 3 and 4 is very clear. Very clear that we're raised to walk in a newness of life. Is that not eternal life? Hello? Even now? Eternal life. Even now. In Christ Jesus. But how many of us Christians have believed, at least traditionally believed, that our eternal life doesn't start until our life beyond the grave starts? I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, some of us have, at least a part of our Christian walks, have not lived a resurrected life. Because we have the same problem that Martha had here in our text. We don't fully comprehend what Jesus says when he says, I am the resurrection and the life. We start living that brand new, resurrected, eternal life the moment that we come up out of those baptismal waters and we're still dripping, soaking wet from them. I don't know if that doesn't excite you. I don't know what else does. We're given that life to live right now. All it's ours to do what we want with, whether we'll be faithful with it or not. But we're given that right now. All believing in Jesus as the resurrection and life, he'll do many things for us. Drive away all of our traditional beliefs about death. It'll cause us to grow in our faith the way it did the disciples. It'll cause us to realize that the main purpose for everything is to glorify God. If you're here this morning and you've never obeyed the gospel plan of salvation, which includes baptism, where we're resurrected to walk in a brand new life, where this same Jesus that resurrected Lazarus, dead as dead could be, will give us a brand new life when we're resurrected out of baptismal waters. Why would you leave with your old life when Jesus offers you a brand new one? We're going to stand and sing our hymn invitation this morning. I don't know where you're at as far as having obeyed or never obeyed, but if you haven't, we want to give you the opportunity to have that brand new life before you leave this building this morning. If you've never obeyed, you come as we sing our hymn.